Hi guys, and welcome to Tidal Gardens. If you are new here, we are a coral farm based in Copley, Ohio, and on this channel, we cover all sorts of reef-related aquarium topics, and in particular, spotlights on individual coral species. This video is all about Cyphastrea. Cyphastrea are one of the hottest corals in reef keeping right now. Just a few years ago, they were relatively unknown and not readily available for purchase. But that's really changed in recent years as more and more people have successfully propagated the various color morphs. For years, the prevalent color morph was the red and blue meteor shower variant, but now there's so many that you can make an entire reef just out of different types of Cyphastrea and have your bases covered for both color and growth patterns. It isn't too difficult to see just why Cyphastrea captures the heart of so many reefers. They are an attractive coral with uniquely spaced polyps, and the fact that they're being aquacultured has all kinds of benefits for both overall sustainability and the robustness of the individual corals. Having said that, there is still an influx of Cyphastrea from wild colonies collected from both Australia and Indonesia, which has its benefits as well as more color morphs are discovered and are made available in the trade. Backing up just a little bit, what are Cyphastrea? Cyphastrea are a massive reef-building species and are part of the stony coral family Merulinidae. In the hobby, they're available predominantly in an encrusting variety, although there are unusual branching and plating varieties available from time to time. They're much less common, but it just goes to show you the diversity of this coral. Now that we've covered some background on Cyphastrea, let's take a look at some of their care requirements. Cyphastrea are one of the easiest stony corals to care for, and it's often recommended to reefers who are delving into stony corals for the first time, mainly because it loves lower light conditions. In fact, if there is one coral that you do not want to put in strong light, or even moderate light to begin with, it's Cyphastrea, because it takes a very long time for them to adjust to high intensity light. We recommend lighting intensity under 100 par to start, and if you want to move them into higher light conditions, do so very slowly. There's really not a lot of benefits to giving this coral an overabundance of light, and it introduces substantial risk of overexposure. So when in doubt, go with dimmer light, and if you want to try to acclimate them to a brighter area of the tank, do so slowly and be prepared to move it back to shadier areas at the first signs of trouble. For example, if it starts to bleach or the polyps remain tightly closed. As for color consistency, Cyphastrea are able to color shift to some degree. They're not as variable as Acropora that can totally shift palette, but Cyphastrea can definitely become more vibrant and colorful when they're happy, and they can take on a more drab appearance when grown in suboptimal conditions. Any number of factors can affect their appearance, such as changes in light, water chemistry, nutrition, or just stressful events like shipping. They might lose some of their color during transit, but over a relatively short period of time, they will color back up quickly if given the right conditions. Let's move on to the topic of water chemistry for Cyphastrea. They're a fast-growing stony coral, and as such, they require some extra attention in comparison to soft corals or slow-growing large polyp stony corals. There are three major chemical parameters that are needed by Cyphastrea to build its stony skeleton. These are calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium. The chemical interaction of these three is a little out of the scope of this video, but we can do a quick summary of all three, starting with calcium. Calcium in most reefs hovers right around 425 parts per million. In solution, it is a bioavailable ion that is taken in by a number of different organisms such as calcareous algae, inverts, and obviously coral to build up calcium carbonate structures. Now, it doesn't swing as wildly as some of the other water parameters, but it's a good idea to test it every now and again to make sure that it stays in the general vicinity of natural seawater. This is especially true in aquariums with fast-growing stony corals like Cyphastrea that will soak up more as they grow larger. Alkalinity is a little bit more difficult to explain than calcium. It's not a particular ion, but a collection of ions, and can be thought of as the buffering capacity of salt water. Buffering capacity is the amount of acid required to lower the pH of saltwater to the point that bicarbonate turns into carbonic acid. In layman's terms, higher alkalinity levels equate to greater chemical stability in our reef tanks. In practice, alkalinity tends to be the parameter that fluctuates the most of these three that we're talking about, and is really the one that needs the most babysitting. In the wild, the alkalinity of the water is right around 70 kH, but I like to have ours a little bit higher at around 8 to 90 kH. There is some anecdotal evidence out there that slightly higher alkalinity levels promotes coral growth and also provides some additional buffering capacity to even out those fluctuations. Maintaining steady levels of calcium and alkalinity can be a little tricky because of how they interact with one another. For example, if your reef tank had a calcium level of, say, 300 parts per million, but you desire a value closer to 400 parts per million, you could theoretically add a calcium supplement to boost it. Unfortunately, reef aquarium chemistry is dynamic, and solutions to chemistry issues are rarely that straightforward in practice. Addition of a calcium supplement in this manner often comes with a corresponding fall in alkalinity. This seesaw effect between calcium and alkalinity stems from how the two ions interact with one another. The two ions combine to form calcium carbonate and can fall right out of solution, thus lowering both levels when you add just calcium. If you're experiencing this in your system, the possible culprit with calcium and alkalinity instability could be magnesium. It's a little counterintuitive, but these three ions interact regularly. Magnesium behaves similarly to calcium. It can bind up carbonate ions and thus increase the overall bioavailability of alkalinity compounds in the water. So again, if you find that no amount of tweaking calcium and alkalinity independently is helping the situation, you may want to make sure that it's not your magnesium level that's low. In saltwater, magnesium levels hover around 1350 parts per million. Again, just maintaining the levels is a tricky art. Fast-growing SPS tanks experience rapid growth, and larger colonies soak up these three parameters, calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium, and also trace elements at a much faster rate. There are many ways to maintain water chemistry. In smaller, lightly stocked aquariums, regular weekly water changes are often enough to keep these parameters stable. But in most cases, additional supplementation is required, especially as Cyphastrea grow larger. The three most popular methods of maintaining these parameters are kalkwasser top-off, calcium reactors, and some manner of two-part dosing, whether manual or automatic, or in some larger systems, some combination of all three of them. You can keep a successful reef using any of the above methods. It's just what really suits your budget and your time availability in order to get the most stable parameters possible. Which one or combination of methods that's best for you depends a lot on the requirements of your system and how much work you do on your tank. Alright, calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium aside, you also have to pay attention to your nutrient levels. By nutrients, we're really referring to nitrates and phosphates. Cyphastrea is pretty adaptable and will survive in lower nutrient as well as higher nutrient situations, but these levels will impact their appearance. Too much nutrient and the coral might turn it an unattractive brown color. Too little nutrient and they might take a pale, emaciated appearance. Given the choice between the two, I personally prefer a slightly higher nutrient level. Nitrate and phosphate are not bad in and of themselves. Elevated levels now can cause problems, but they're absolutely required for biological processes in coral and cannot be produced through photosynthesis. Cyphastrea don't really tolerate zero nutrients, especially without significant amounts of supplemental planktonic coral foods or amino acids. Like I said, they need to get their nitrate and phosphate from somewhere. I generally try to shoot for nitrate levels right around 5 to 10 parts per million, but I really wouldn't freak out if they were slightly higher, let's say around 25 parts per million. Similarly, I try to keep my phosphates right around 0.01 to 0.05 parts per million. Now, if those figures get too high, it may slow down their growth or cause them to take on poor coloration. Worst case scenario, those chemical parameters lead to other problems like algae blooms, which is both unsightly and can compromise the health of these corals in your tank. One important factor worth mentioning about Cyphastrea is the amount of flow that you provide. They require a moderate, indirect flow to ensure that no detritus builds up on their body. As they grow, however, their shape can become more of a detritus trap, and you may have to change things up just to keep them clean. If the detritus is allowed to build up, over time it's going to kill the coral underneath. So it's worth bearing this in mind for both placement and for the shape you plan the coral to grow in, as some shapes will be easier than others. Cyphastrea are mostly encrusting. However, we have seen very uncommon plating and branching varieties. One last little bit about water flow. If you want to feed the corals directly, you'll want to be able to completely shut off the flow to them, because any flow will wash away the food before the coral has a chance to grab and eat it. On the topic of feeding, I will be the first to say that most hobbyists do not go through the effort of target feeding Cyphastrea, and that it may be more effort than it's worth. If you turn off the flow and provide them with appropriately sized food, they do take in a fair amount, but then they slough off the rest. So if you decide to target feed them, there are a couple sources of food that would work well: amino acids and small zooplankton. Starting with amino acids, they are simple organic compounds containing a carboxyl group and an amino group. Organisms use them for building proteins, and they're also necessary for other biological functions, such as neurotransmitter transport and biosynthesis. The amino acids needed vary on a species-by-species basis, but practically speaking, even if certain amino acids go unutilized by a certain coral, they will be taken up quickly by other organisms for their biological processes. There are several commercially available amino acid additives, and you can also DIY your own solution from a mix of amino acid powders. Small zooplankton include things like rotifers and cyclops plankton. The rotifers we feed are usually 0.5 millimeter in size. Cyclops plankton are a little bit larger, usually about 1 to 2 millimeters. They come frozen and are basically a small, granular, oily paste that creates an orange cloud when you put it into your tank. The presence of rotifers in the water is immediately apparent to the corals because many of them will open up and start their feeding behavior. You can see here, one polyp is trying to eat a mysis strip. It's a little bit too large for them, but I have to give this little guy credit for his ambitious appetite. I have to mention that although coral nutrition is important, it's equally important to make sure to not overfeed the aquarium. Overfeeding can lead to issues that can be a hassle to overcome, major hassle. A little bit of feeding goes a long way, but all those benefits are wiped away if you cause a nutrient overload. And especially considering that Cyphastrea are not the most aggressive feeders in the world, cost-benefit's not really working out in this favor. When it comes to sustainability, Cyphastrea are a bright spot for propagation and aquaculture. They make a great choice for both commercial aquaculture and to home propagation efforts due to their exceptional growth rates. All of the different color morphs available in the hobby today are a result of successful propagation. Because when you really break it down, Cyphastrea are relatively infrequently imported. So most of the frag-sized pieces that you see available, they're all likely farmed. In conclusion, who is Cyphastrea really for? I see it as a great beginner-friendly coral that can find a home in a variety of tanks ranging from mixed reefs to shadier sections of an SPS-dominated tank. They have a very unique appearance and come in a wide variety of colors, so if you're a collector, Cyphastrea will definitely keep you busy tracking down all the different color morphs. So that pretty much wraps it up for Cyphastrea. Thank you very much for watching. I also invite you to check us out online at tidalgardens.com for this and other corals that we're currently farming. Until next time, happy reefing.